There's an awful lot of barriers to reporting a sex crime for women generally, but even far more so for women in the sex industry. What do you see as the most common barriers to reporting crimes committed against the women?
The biggest problem is the fact that sex work is criminalised. We've seen a lot of cases where women come forward to report rape or gang attacks or being held at knife point or other kind of violence, and when they do that, the police, instead of investigating those attacks, actually prosecute the women for prostitution offences. And we've seen that in so many different situations.
And women who are working together for safety, a couple of women or 3 or 4 working in a flat, organising themselves to stay safe, they face extra barriers to reporting crimes committed against them because that's termed as a brothel. What's the experience of the women that you help in that situation?
What we've seen in the last few years is raids, arrests and prosecutions of sex workers really soaring. Often the raids are done with the excuse that the police are looking for victims of violence or victims of trafficking, but that's not what actually happens in practice. What happens in practice is that immigrant women working in the sex industry are targeted, and that increase in raids has got everybody on edge, completely terrorised and fearful. Nobody can establish a place, invest in any kind of security measures, work out a kind of a safety network with other people. All those measures that women want to take have been sabotaged and undermined by both the criminal law and the policing and prosecution policy. We see, women working together with a mate in a flat, 25 police officers raiding that premises, rude and abusive, women being asked to undress in front of male officers, the police taking the money that they find on the premises and not giving receipts. That's the stuff that we hear day in, day out from women working in the sex industry. And in that context, it's very hard to trust that the police and the authorities have our interests in mind.
So the police in Merseyside have changed or appear to have changed their perception of people in the sex trade, and they're now prioritising their protection over enforcing the law. Do you think the Merseyside hate crime model should be adopted throughout the UK?
On the face of it, if anything that can improve the reporting of rape and other sexual violence and other violence, and the number of cases that are actually successfully prosecuted and rapists taken off the street, anything that does that has to be a good thing.
Yeah.
But I do think there are a number of problems with the Liverpool model. First of all, outside of that very small area, sex workers are still being prosecuted, including in premises. For example, we have women in our network who face prosecution. So it seems that the protection and the police improvements only apply in a very narrow area, and they're very dependent on the health professionals scrutinising what the police are doing. And that can work in that area, but we know from other areas and we know from our own work that you build a relationship with certain police officers and then they move on.
Yeah.
And then the whole procedure, because the criminal law still remains, so there's always the threat of criminalisation. You can't make any really significant progress because it's dependent on the goodwill and the discretion of particular police officers. And we feel that generally across the board, the police should actually abide by what the public wants them to prioritise, which is women's safety. Whenever the public is asked what they consider to be the priorities for the police, it's always personal safety, over and above, way over and above any kind of prosecution for prostitution offences. And that has to be a change, a policy change that happens across the board, but the criminal law has to be changed, because otherwise the police always say, well, we have to enforce the law, and they always have that power, and sex workers won't come forward when that threat of arrest and prosecution is hanging over. And even when they criminalise clients, that has been done in the name of women's equality, but it hasn't helped women. It hasn't helped women working in the sex industry, because now clients too are nervous of arrest. And all those kind of practical and obvious steps that you would take to try and protect yourself from attack and minimise the risk, such as having a quick chat with the client beforehand to see if he's drunk, to see if there's anybody else in the car, you know, just to get a bit of an assessment of the person, which could make all the difference. We have a right to that kind of protection, and we have a right to insist that the police do the job that the public want them to do, which is to protect women.